Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's great to see so many people come to listen to me about Power Query. First of all, let me introduce myself. I've probably already been introduced in Swedish, but these are all of my links and books. This is my email address. Follow me on Twitter. I do consultancy and training all around Europe. I come to Sweden probably once a year, maybe. So, it's nice to be back. It's always a good place to come to. These are my books. This is my blog. That's the end of the advertising bit. Let's get on to the real presentation. So, we're going to talk about Power Query. Who's used Power Query already? Who's never used Power Query? Oh, quite a lot. Okay, well, that's good. What we're going to do in this session is we're going to have, first of all, a brief overview of Power Query, not too long for those of you who've already used it. Then after that, we're going to go as a kind of deep dive under the covers, learning how to do the really cool stuff with Power Query that you can only do with a little bit of coding. It's not going to be complex coding, it's going to be very, very easy. But it will be enough for you to be able to go away and show off your Power Query skills to all of those self-service BI users you have in your organization who are saying they don't need professional BI people anymore. We'll have a break halfway through, but there will be lots and lots of demos all the way, I promise. Right, Power Query. What is Power Query and why should I care about it? Defining Power Query is actually quite difficult because Power Query is not just Power Query. The technology behind Power Query is appearing in lots and lots of other places. Now, I'm going to use the term Power Query. I'm going to do all of my demos in Power Query in Excel 2013. But pretty much most of what I show you will work in Excel 2010. Some of it, not quite all of it, but some of it will work in Power BI Desktop. And we will see Power Query appearing in the future, possibly in other places. Power Query is an Excel add-in in Excel 2010 and Excel 2013. It is native functionality in Excel 2016. I haven't had a chance to install Excel 2016 on this laptop yet. It's been out for 2 days. I'm afraid I was already in Sweden when that happened. But Power Query is no longer called Power Query in Excel 2016. It is called Get and Transform, but it's the same thing, but it's a native feature of Excel. It's not an add-in anymore. Power Query is also integrated into Power BI Desktop, where it is the Get Data experience. And like I said, we should expect to see Power Query appearing in other places as well. Now, nothing is confirmed, but it's very likely we will see Power Query integration with SQL Server integration services. So you'll be able to take your Power Query queries and execute them in integration services. There are rumors that Power Query will be integrated with reporting services. So if you think about a report builder type scenario where somebody is trying to build their own reports, the most difficult thing about using Report Builder is building the queries. Power Query can do that. The integration makes sense. And at some point, though unfortunately not in the RTM version of Analysis Services 2016, but at some point, hopefully after that, we will be able to use Power Query as a data source for analysis services. And this is important. People have been asking for this because at the moment you can take a model built in Excel using Power Pivot and you can upgrade that to an analysis services tabular project inside Visual Studio. The only trouble is that doesn't work if you've used Power Query in Excel to load your data. So the integration between Power Query and analysis services will be important if that's going to work. That has been promised, it's been delayed, it's not going to be an RTM, so maybe we will get that in a service pack. But anyway, the point is Power Query is not just something for the Excel guys. Power Query is something that even corporate BI developers need to know about and need to care about. And more than that, Power Query is lots of fun. So from a sheer kind of techie enjoyment point of view, the things I'm going to show you today are, really cool. And hopefully I will inspire you to go away and play with Power Query and do stuff with it. I enjoy using Power Query not just because it's useful for my job, but also, in my day-to-day life of running a business and trying to plan coming to user groups and things like that. I have to do stuff in Excel, and Power Query is really useful there. So, what does Power Query do? Power Query does three things. It allows you to connect to multiple data sources. So things like text files, things like relational databases, more exotic data sources like Facebook, and things like that. Once you've connected to those data sources, it allows you to not only import the data, but also transform the data, to change it, to filter it, to sort it, to aggregate it, to do stuff to it, to get it into the format that you want. And then, at least in Excel, you have the choice of loading it to two destinations. So you can load it either to a table on the Excel worksheet, or you can load it to the Excel data model. And the Excel data model is the proper name for what everybody calls Power Pivot. But Power Pivot is just the Excel add-in. The actual database engine where the data is stored in Excel is the Excel data model. In Power BI Desktop, we just talk about the data model, and the Power Query part of Power BI Desktop just loads to the data model. There are new builds of Power Query being released pretty much every month, so Power Query is growing and changing very quickly. I have the very latest version of Power Query installed on this machine. If you've downloaded Power Query a couple of months ago, it is always worth getting hold of the latest version because new stuff is being added all of the time. So, for those of you who haven't seen Power Query before, let's do a very, very quick demo. This is Excel 2013 Professional Plus, and I have Power Query installed. You can use Power Query with any edition of Excel 2010-2013. However, if you want to use the full functionality in Excel 2010 and Excel 2013, you need Office Professional Plus or better. They've changed the licensing a little bit in Excel 2016. The full functionality is available in Office Professional and above, not Professional Plus. Hopefully, I think in most organizations, in most big companies, you will have Professional Plus or equivalent anyway. So I have the Power Query add-in installed, and here is the Power Query tab on the ribbon. And here on the left-hand side, I have all of the different places that I can get my data from. Now, I'm going to be dealing with all of the boring data sources like CSV files and Excel files and relational databases in a minute. But what I'm going to do first of all is use this option to get data from the web. Now, this week I have been in Oslo, I've been in Malmo, I've been in Gothenburg, and now I'm in Stockholm. And the one thing that I've found is that it's been raining everywhere that I've been. And I've also found that I've got a hole in my left shoe. So this has not been a particularly pleasant experience. So what I've realized is I should have checked the weather. And being British, I can go to the BBC weather website. And here I can look up, or here, this is what I should have done. I should have looked up what the weather's going to be like everywhere. So, yeah, spelling, sorry. There we go. Stockholm. So let's see what the weather is going to be like in Stockholm. Oh, well, at least this afternoon, I've got an afternoon off in Stockholm, it's not going to rain, which I'm thankful for. Now, let's imagine that I wanted to take this data and I wanted to build a dashboard in Excel, or I wanted to be able to analyze the weather in Stockholm for some reason. I can use this web page as a data source for Power Query. So if I go to Power Query and I go to From Web, I can paste the URL into here, click OK, and Power Query is going to connect to that web page, and it's going to look for any tables of data that it can find in there and import them. Now, we will see here that it can find 2 tables of data. It can also treat the source for the web page as a data source as well. If it can't find any tables, you can just import all of the source and try and look for data in there. And if I click on here, I can see a preview of the data. I click on here, and yeah, this looks like the data that I want to be able to import. Now, I could import this data just like this, but actually I'm going to click the Edit button. Now, those of you who are more advanced Excel users will be thinking, hold on, Excel has always been able to do this. Excel has always been able to scrape data from web pages. You know, who cares about this? The point about Power Query is, well, it will actually work with more web pages than the native Excel functionality. But the point about Power Query is not just the types of data source that it can connect to. The really important thing about Power Query is that it allows you to do things to the data before you import it. Because in most cases, the data source doesn't have the data in the format that you actually need it in. So for example, if we look here and we look in the maximum day temperature column, we can see that actually we've got the temperatures that we need, but we have centigrade and Fahrenheit in the same column. So if we want to try and do, some averages, we want to draw a graph, this is useless. We need to be able to extract those centigrade temperatures into a separate column. And we can do this with Power Query. So for example, there's my maximum day temperature column. The first thing that I want to be able to do is split this in half. So if we look at this column, you can see that there is a space between the centigrade and the Fahrenheit values. So I can right-click, split column by delimiter. I'm going to use a space, click OK, and now I've split into centigrade and Fahrenheit. And nobody apart from Americans cares about Fahrenheit anymore, so we will remove that. And we'll remove the night temperature. So we've got our centigrade values, but it's still not great because we have at the end of the values the degrees centigrade characters, which we don't really need. So again, we can do things like split. This time I'm going to split by the number of characters. I'm going to split and get the last 2 characters. So I'm going to take the last 2 characters of that string and split them into their own column. Click OK. And again, I can just remove that. And let's just call that temperature. Now, there are lots of other things that I could do here. Maybe I only wanted to look at values for Saturday and Sunday, so I can filter. I could sort my temperatures in descending order. And there are tons of other things up here. So for example, I can take my text, I can format it. So maybe let's transform it, put everything into uppercase or lowercase or right case. I can do calculations. So I take temperature, add a column, and say, I don't know, temperature times 1.5. And there's temperature multiplied by 1.5. I've got all kinds of other calculations I can do. Add, subtract, multiply, divide, trig. I can round. I can say, is this odd or even? If I had date columns or time columns, I could extract the year or the day or the month or the first day of the month or the last day of the month. Lots and lots of things. Now, I'm not going to spend this presentation showing you all of the cool things that you can do in the user interface. You can go away and find these things out for yourself. It's a very easy to learn user interface. There are lots of tutorials out there. But I guarantee that everybody in this room, once they downloaded Power Query, would be able to work out what each of these buttons does. There's an easy way to work out what each button does. That is to press it. So we're not going to waste our time doing any of that. The last thing to say here is that now we've got our data in the format that we need, we get to choose where we're going to load it. So I can click the Close and Load button. I can say Close and Load to. And I can say, let's load this to a table on a worksheet, the existing worksheet at cell A1. And I can also tick this box to add the data to the data model. And I can do either or both. And when I click Load, Power Query is going to go away, it's going to connect to the data source, it's going to apply all of those transformations, and it's going to load the data to the destinations that I've chosen. It's going to load the data to the table on the worksheet, and we can see if we go to the Power Pivot window that we have loaded the data to the Excel data model as well. And tomorrow, if I refresh this query, or indeed if I just click Refresh All in Excel, Power Query will do the same thing. It will connect to that web page, it will apply those same transformations, and it will load the data to the places that I've chosen. So you can think about this as being self-service ETL. You can think about the relationship between Power Query and Power Pivot as being the same kind of relationship as the one between integration services and analysis services. Right, that's the basic functionality of Power Query. And like I said, you will be able to go away, download Power Query, and you will be able to do lots of really cool things in the UI just by teaching yourself. But there is more. So even though Power Query in the UI is very, very cool, if you go under the covers, you can do some really amazing things with a little bit of programming. Because Power Query is actually just an interface, a user interface that generates code. And the code behind Power Query is in a language which nobody's really sure what its proper name is. It was originally called M. That was how it was developed. And indeed, the M language was developed even before Power Query. It was developed several years ago as part of a project built by Microsoft, which then got canned, and this technology got rescued and turned into Power Query. So the language is unofficially called M. That's what most people call it. The problem with M is that there are already lots of other things out there called M. Facebook just announced a language called M. So Microsoft in its documentation will call this Power Query formula language, but actually that's not really a good name because this is going to be used in Power BI and it's not called Power Query in Excel 2016. So I don't really know what to call this language, so I'm just going to keep on calling it M. So everything you do in Power Query is translated back to M code, and there are more things that you can do when you write your own code than you can do in the user interface. M is a functional language. So if you've come across languages like F#, M is very similar to those. M is a very simple language as well. Now, in the next 15 minutes, I will teach you pretty much everything you need to know about M. There is really not much to learn. So it is a very, very easy language to learn. If you've done any kind of programming before in the past, you will learn it quite easily. I am not a programmer. I used to be a programmer a long time ago, and even then it was Visual Basic. So maybe that means I've never been a proper programmer. But I promise you, M is a very, very easy language to learn. There are some things that you might need to think about in a different way, but the M language is so stripped back, it doesn't even have the concept of loops. Now, you don't even need loops, and I will show you why later, but it is really, really very simple. But once you learn how to use M, you can do all kinds of amazing things. So, let's have a look again at this query that we've built. So here in Excel, I've clicked inside the table. Power Query has woken up and realized that this is a table fed by Power Query. I can click Edit and reopen the Power Query query editor. Now, some terminology. What we created just then was something called a query. So we have things called Power Query queries, which, well, it is what it is. So this is a query. We can have multiple queries saved inside a workbook, and each query you can think of as being like a job. It gets data from one place and it outputs some data. Now, each query is made up of one or more steps, and having selected my query here, we can go to the right-hand pane and we can see the name of the query and all of the steps inside that query. Now, if I click on a step, I can see the data as it was when the step was applied. So I don't just see the output of the query, I can see all of the intermediate steps. So I can see each change as it's made to the query. I can also delete steps, I can move steps, I can rearrange steps, I can split one query into multiple queries, I can do all kinds of things. Now, when I click on a step, I not only see the data as it was at the change, but also up here in the formula bar, I can see the M expression used to calculate that step. So I clicked on something in the toolbar, a change, a transformation was applied to the data, and this is the code that was generated behind. And I can edit the code here in the formula bar, or if I go to the View tab and click on the Advanced Editor, I can see the entire code for the query. And I can edit this, I can delete this, I can write whatever I want in here. Unfortunately, this is just a text box. There is no IntelliSense, there's no context-sensitive help, there's no color coding, there's nothing yet. This is on the way. Hopefully it will come soon, but at the moment you're just writing code. Now, let's learn the basics of the M language. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new query, and I can do that inside the query editor by going to New Source, Other Sources, Blank Query. So this option allows me to create a new query that just doesn't do anything. It's almost blank. So at the moment it's just going to be called query 1. And if I open the query editor, there's some stuff in there, but it will just return an empty string. I'm going to delete all of that. Now, audience interaction time. I know you're Scandinavian, but we need to have some audience interaction. What's the first program that we write in any programming language? Absolutely. So let's write Hello World in M. That is Hello World in M. Nice and easy to understand. I click Done. And now the output of the query is Hello World. The first thing to point out about Power Query, which isn't obvious even for people who've done a lot of work with Power Query, is that a Power Query query can output data of any data type. Now, in the user interface, most of the time, you're outputting tables. And a table is a data type in Power Query. But in this case, we're outputting data which is text. I could edit this, and I could output a query that says, just returns 1, 2, 3. You'll notice that in the query pane, at least in the very latest version of Power Query, there are different icons for that will tell you the data type that each query outputs. So I can see this returns a table, this returns a whole number. Now, each yes. Power Query, well, the Power Query data type is called text. But yeah, it's text, it's a string. Did I say it was a number? No. Okay. All right, sorry, yes. It's text, yes. But the data type is called text. Like any programming language, they've got their own set of names for data types. All right, so the next thing to learn about M is that an M query is just one expression. That expression is evaluated and it returns a result. It returns a value. And indeed, this is kind of fundamental to M. It's obvious, but it's worth pointing out again. So M is all about expressions. Expressions are evaluated to return values. Now, these values could be primitive data types like text, like numbers. They could be structured data types like tables. So a table is a data type in M. There are other structured data types we will see that are called, for example, lists and records. We can also return functions. A function is a data type in M, and we'll see a query returning a function a little bit later. But essentially, each query is a single expression which is evaluated to return a value. So here, if I edit my query and my query becomes 1 + 1, when I evaluate this expression, what value will I get back? Thank you. So much for all I've read about the Scandinavian education system. So yes, we get 2 back. All right, now, you're probably thinking, this all makes sense, but this doesn't tie up with that complicated code I saw for the other query. Because we were doing loads of stuff in that other query. That can't be a single expression, surely? Well, actually it is. It is a single expression. It's just that the M language allows you to break one expression down into multiple smaller expressions. And the key to doing that is the let expression. So the let expression is the second out of maybe 3 things you need to learn about the M language. The let expression allows you to break one big expression down into multiple smaller expressions. So, a let expression has a let clause and an in clause. And in the let clause, what we have is a comma delimited list of variables. And each variable has an expression which can be evaluated to return a value. So let's put some variables in here. Step 1 equals 100. Step 2 equals 3. Step 3 equals step 1 times step 2. In the in clause, we have one final expression which, when it's evaluated, will return what the let expression is meant to return. So I'm going to get this to return step 3. Who wants to tell me what this is going to return? Yes. There aren't going to be any trick questions, so you don't need to be shy. So it returns 300. So you can see how the let expression works, but it's not really as it seems. Because you look at this and you think, this is code, I understand this. There's 3 lines in the code, it's like a kind of 3-line language, and then we just output at the end. Well, actually, I can change my in expression and click done, and we return hello world again. So the in expression doesn't have to reference any of the other variables that we've listed. The in expression could access some of the variables, but not all. So I can return step 1 plus 5. And if I return step 1 plus 5, I get 105 back. And indeed, I could say, well, let's return step 3, but let's put step 3 up here. So let's play around with the order. And it still works. So this is not line-by-line execution. It is what I described. This is just a list of variables. The variables can reference each other, but they do not have to be in any kind of order. And this is just another expression which can reference some of those variables, or it can do something else completely. The way to think about a let expression is that it's evaluated from the in expression backwards. So when I say, let's return step 3, we say, well, okay, well, we've got to go and find what step 3 is. So step 3 is evaluated. To evaluate step 3, we have to evaluate step 1 and step 2, and these two variables are evaluated as well. But in this case, if I want to return step 1, this is evaluated. It means we evaluate step 1, and Power Query just won't evaluate step 2 and step 3 because they're not referenced, they're not needed. So this is not procedural code, it's not line by line, it's just a list of variables that return values, and variables can reference other variables. But again, this is all very simple. What was actually happening in the example we saw here? Well, hopefully now you can begin to understand a little bit more about what's going on here. So you can see that we've got a let expression. Every query generated by the user interface is a single let expression. And you can see we've got a list of variables here. The first slightly confusing thing is that because the variable names are used as the list of steps in the applied steps pane, when a variable name has a space in, so here's the change type step, when that variable name has a space in, it has to be in double quotes with a hash in front. That's why this code looks a little bit ugly. It's just that it's saying, well, this is a variable name. But you can see that here I'm defining a variable called change type, and on the next variable that is being referenced. So the change type step will return a table, and that table is being referenced in the split column by delimiter variable here. Now the only other thing to notice here is that we've got a whole bunch of functions. Power Query has got lots and lots of built-in functions for transforming tables, for doing maths, for summing up lists of values, all kinds of things. So for example, up here we have the web.contents function, which gets data from the web, web.page, which will interpret that as a web page, table.transform column types, which takes a table and sets data types. We've got, for example, here table.split column, which takes a column, takes a table in that, takes a column in that table and splits that column into two. And we've got, rename columns, remove columns, functions that do pretty much what you'd expect, but they take a table, they rename a column in a table, they remove a column. So there isn't really anything difficult going on here. The code looks horrible, but it's not really difficult to understand. So we'll come back to let's talk about some more structured values. So we're pretty much there with everything we need to learn about M. After the break, we'll talk about writing your own functions in M, but you have learnt now the basics of the language. So it is very, very straightforward. Like I said, there's nothing like a loop, nothing apart from that. It is worth pointing out something about these structured data types. So as I said, a table is a structured data type. Most queries will return tables because most of the output we want is a table. We will, over the course of this session, see two other important structured data types. Records, and a record is just like a table with one row in it. And a list, which is really just like an array. It's just a list of values. You can have lists of numbers, lists of text values, lists of tables, lists of lists, all kinds of things. Now, we've done the theory. What is the first useful trick that we can do with this. Now, what I'm going to show you now is probably the most useful thing you can do in Power Query once you've learnt a bit of code. This is really, really handy, and it's not something that you can do just in the UI. It's something that I call parameterized queries, but it's something that lots of people want to be able to do with Power Query. So the problem is, you want to do some reporting on a very large table of data. So I guess most people have played around with Power Pivot, right? So the problem with Power Pivot is that it wants to load all of its data into memory. And if you have a very large data source, you just can't load all of the data into memory. So what you need to do is to filter that data before it goes to Power Pivot, or filter it before it comes to your table in Excel. Now, Power Query obviously will allow you to do that. You know, in Power Query, you can go in and you can edit the query to filter it before you load it in. And that's great for you or I. But in a lot of cases, what you want to be able to do is to build an easy-to-use solution that you can hand over to those guys in accounts, and which enables them to filter the data before they load it, but doesn't force them to open the Power Query window. Because you know, as soon as they open the Power Query window, they're going to screw something up. You want to make it idiot-proof. So how can we do this in Power Query? What we want to be able to do is allow them to do something in Excel, in the workbook, that will filter the data that comes in. So let's see how to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new query, and I'm going to connect to SQL Server. I'm going to connect to my local instance of SQL Server. I'm going to connect to AdventureWorks. And I'm going to connect to the dim date table. So this is just the date dimension table in AdventureWorks. It's very boring, but at least it's something that everybody will understand. It's just a table of dates. There's nothing interesting here. So I'm going to click OK. And I've got my table of dates here. So let's rename this as date. And I'm just going to pick some of the columns because I don't need everything. Let's grab that. Let's grab that. Let's grab that. And let's grab that. So I can right click, remove all other columns. And there we go. Let's rename some columns. So we've got date, day, month, and year. So this is the data in the format that we want, but still we need to filter it. So we can't load everything. We want to get a filtered subset of this table. So in Power Query, the easy way to do this would just be to click and say, I only want Friday. OK. And there we've got Friday. And we can go away, load this to a table on a new worksheet. And there we are. We've got our Friday's data. But like I said, what we want to be able to do is to be able to take some user feedback, to be able to say, well, what day do you actually want? And then be able to filter by the day the user is selected. Now, what I can do here is I can say, enter day to filter by. And let's imagine in this cell, the user can enter a day name. Now, in the real world, we might want to validate that. We might have a drop-down list. We do all kinds of things in Excel. But at the moment, we're just entering a day name here. And that cell I'm going to turn into a named range. Let's call it data filter. So a named range is just the ability in Excel to give a name to one or more cells. So it's just, giving a bunch of cells a name. Now, Power Query can read data from named ranges. It can read data from Excel tables, but in this case, I want it to read data from a named range. It's not obvious how to do that from the user interface, but if I just click in my named range, go to the Power Query tab on the ribbon, and click From Table, it will get the data from that named range. It will interpret it as a table. I don't want it to add the headers, but there we have Monday. So at this point, we've got a table with one column and one row, and it's got the value Monday in it. Now, this is a table. The query returns a table. I don't actually want a table. What I want is the text inside that table. So the easy way of getting that out is to right-click, drill down. When I do that, an expression gets built here. So source is the name of the previous step that returns that table. Here in braces, I've got 0. This simply says give me the value from the first row. It's a 0-based array. So give me the value from the first row and in the column called column 1. So we can actually kind of reference individual cells inside a table like this. And when we do that, we get this bit of text, Monday. So we've got a query that returns a text value, which is Monday. Now, this query is called data filter. Inside M, we can reference the values returned by queries in other queries. So I can use data filter now as a variable inside another query, and it will return a text value. Now, if I go back to date here, and I have a look at my code, if we have a look at the very last step called filtered rows that uses table.selectRows to filter the data, we can see where the value Friday has been hard-coded. So that's a hard-coded bit of text. The data filter query also returns a text value containing a day. So instead of hard-coding the filter here, let's change this so that we're filtering by whatever data filter returns. So we've got a dynamic, effectively something like a parameterized query. And I click OK. Now, I'm going to click past all this. I'm going to explain after the break what this does. Don't worry. But you will see now we're just getting the values for Monday. Close and load. This query has been behaving very, very slowly all week. You will see other demos later which perform a little bit better. It's not the query that's being slow. There's something else in SQL Server that's going a bit funny here. There's another query that's being executed, I think, to get to work out the indexes on tables or something. But anyway, you can see we've now got Monday, and we now can enter any day name we like Sunday. And I don't have to go to Power Query. I don't have to see the query pane. I can just refresh this like any other table. Right-click refresh. I can use the refresh button on the Data tab in Excel, and it will refresh, it will execute, it will read the data from the named range, and it will use that as a filter to only get the days that we're requesting. So you can see how you could build up an Excel-based solution where people type things inside cells, Power Query reads those values from cells and uses those as filters or other inputs to your main query. Power Query queries are just OLEDB connections in Excel like any other. So they can be refreshed in VBA, you can set them to refresh on open, you can set them to refresh every 2 minutes or something. There are still a few lingering bugs with this, so it doesn't always work as expected, but if you've got at least the latest version of Excel, which this is the Office 365 version of Excel, which has bug fixes applied every month. I personally haven't had any problems with doing this for quite a while, but some of the kind of standard installations of Excel might still have some lurking bugs in. But you can see now how we can start to use M-code to do more sophisticated things. So if we take this example, and here is something that I've prepared earlier, which uses the same principle but actually does something a little bit more ambitious. You know, quite often what people want to be able to do is they will say, well, okay, here is my big fact table, it's a list of invoices, and I want to be able to do some kind of invoice reporting inside Excel. Now, from a corporate BI point of view, the usual solution for this, at least in a Microsoft world, would be to say, okay, I'm going to build a reporting services report for you. So you would build a reporting services report, there would be drop-down parameters, you'd click OK, you'd run the report, you'd do a parameterized query, it would render in the browser, and then the end user would say, well, that looks nice, let's export to Excel, because that's where I really want it. And then you'd spend hours and hours trying to get it to render nicely to Excel, because the columns would be all messed up and stuff like that. So it would be a pain. So why not actually just do this in Excel with Power Query? So what I've got here is a query that gets invoice information from the Internet Sales Fact Table in AdventureWorks. And I can choose a year and a month and a day. And when I refresh, it's nice and quick. You can see that I've got all of the invoices for the particular year, month, and day that I've selected. And if I choose 2002 February Monday and refresh, I've just got the invoices for February 2002 Monday. I've played a couple of little tricks here. Unfortunately, Power Query can't actually read the data from the slicer, but there are ways around this. Let me explain what I did in this case. So let me clear the selection from the slicer. The first thing that I did was I used Power Query to load the entire date table onto another sheet. So this is all of the possible dates that I want. Now, like I said, you know, there could be more things going on here, but I just wanted to keep this still fairly simple. So I'm loading the entire table of dates here. And that is this table. Once you've loaded a table into Excel, you can use slicers to filter that table. So I created a whole bunch of slicers on the year, month, and day column. And then they will appear on this sheet. I copied and pasted them to this sheet. So when I choose a slicer here, like choose a selection like 2003 March Wednesday, I'm choosing the slicer here, but it's actually filtering this table here. You can see the filter icons. So now I've got a filtered table. So I used Power Query to populate this table. I can now use this table as a data source for another Power Query query. Now, unfortunately, when Power Query reads data from a filtered table, it doesn't see what the filters are. It doesn't see the filters applied. But again, there is an Excel trick. You can add an extra column on the table in Excel. And this is an Excel expression that will return 1 if the row is visible and 0 otherwise. And then I use Power Query to read from that table. So there's the total table. Filtered rows will just simply return only the rows where visible equals 1. So that should just be the selected rows. Actually, let me refresh that. So there we are. There's our filtered rows. That's what's returned by that second query. And then all I'm doing for the main query is saying, let's connect to the big fact table. Let's get all the columns that we want. And then I'm doing effectively an inner join between the table, the filtered table, and the fact table. And at the end of the day, I just get the rows containing the filtered values. So this is a nice trick. You could also imagine just having, pre-populated drop-downs. You can use Excel's data validation tools. You can just say, well, let's enter an invoice number and then search on that. There are all kinds of variations you can imagine on this. But, at the end of the day, what people want from their solutions is often, their data in a table in Excel. So why not build the solution in Excel? And Power Query makes it very, very easy to do that. Right, that brings us to the end of the first section. Are there any questions you want to ask before you go away and have your coffee and cake? Yes.
Yes, so in your last example, that extra column with 111 visible was added to the output from a previous query.
Yes. Because Power Query I've got two queries. The first query outputs to the table. I'm then, without that column, then because that becomes an Excel table, I can add an extra column on there with an Excel formula in that will return 1 if the table is visible. So we've then got an Excel table. I can then use that as a data source for the second query. And when I use that as a data source for the second query, I've got that extra column in there. The first query, it doesn't really matter that the table is being populated by a query. By the time it's populated, it's just an Excel table like any other. So it's not using special Power Query functionality. This is just existing Excel functionality where you could bind a table to the output of any query. Yeah. Not in Excel 2010 or 2013, but you can in Excel 2016. So one of the advantages of using Excel 2016 is that because it's natively integrated into Excel, there is pretty good VBA support. So you can create new queries, you can delete, you can... so I've got a blog post. I didn't write all the code, but there was a guy in China who actually spent ages and ages building loads and loads of really good VBA examples for importing queries from a text file, exporting them to a text file. Excel 2016 also allows you to copy and paste queries between workbooks as well. Yeah.
In your final example here, is there some way to automatically refresh the data when you slice in slicers?
You could do that in VBA because you can refresh a Power Query query in Excel 2010 or 2013 in VBA because it's just a connection. So you can then create a button in VBA, press the button when you're ready to refresh, and that will refresh for you. So it's very, very easy to do that. All right, coffee time. And then if we come back in 10 minutes, we will see more cool stuff.